Welcome, Greg. So glad to speak to you today.
How are you?
Um, I just want to introduce you very quickly as someone that lives with me in Bali, and I have come to know you have a kind of expertise, I want to say, from my point of view, in bioelectric health, in what is the human biofield, and me working with Kundalini energy. I have been getting into this topic a bit recently and trying to explain more and more what is really happening in our system, in our bodies, on the biological level, on the physiological level. And yeah, with the Kundalini energy, many of us have experienced electricity, big amounts of electricity running up and down our spine, being felt in the rest of our body. And I'm so glad to have you here today to help us understand a bit more what is going on there. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, this has been a fascinating topic for me for years. Um, you know, I've kind of come to the study of, I call it bioenergetics, or another term you could call it biophysics. Kind of through the back door, because I'm neither trained in electronics or physics, and I've taken the same biology courses that everyone took in college and high school and whatnot. And yeah, when I started my health journey, I didn't have any major health problems. I was more one of these like biohacker types that was interested in kind of health optimization. But for me as an athlete, I was interested in like, well, hey, how do I, speed the recovery process, and and how do things work? It's like, how do I take apart my body so, and understand it more, kind of grease the gears a little bit better so I could climb mountains faster, and and more skillfully, and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I just started reading, and started kind of reading the biohacking stuff about maybe 14, 15 years ago. And as a process of doing that, I started reading the work of some of these famous biohacker types out there, and they would say scandalous things, and I would be like, "What? Okay, you know, whatever he says, I'm not going to pass any judgment, but I'm just going to read the source material, and and then check, verify it." So I started reading the source material, and at first it's like reading Chinese because, not having a background in medicine or chemistry, or, a lot of these disciplines that, are kind of required to understand these. Um, yeah, I just, I kind of had to build my knowledge base around, like subject matter of interest. So, like the fuel, and I'm thinking, oh, it's the food, and it's like, and it's this, and it's got to be a little bit of this, a little less of that. And, and then I actually read a book. It was a 12-year longitudinal study on some South Pacific Islanders by a Swedish doctor by the name of Staffan Lindberg. And he lived with the natives in, the Trobriand Islands for 12 years and documented kind of their lifestyles, their diets, and their incidence of disease. And he came away from 12 years and he was like, hey, his conclusions, just broadly speaking, were well, first of all, there was no heart disease on these islands. There was no, cerebral, vascular, any kind of problems. Like the number one killers in Western society are like heart disease, I think, first, and then all these neurological disorders, kind of follow after that. And that didn't exist on these islands. He didn't even have a word for stroke or heart attack. Didn't exist. And so his takeaway after 12 years was, uh, if you control for infant mortality, bacterial infection, accidental death, and homicide, so those four factors, the average lifespan and health span was, around 80 years. And so I was like, oh, okay, Perfect excuse. I'm gonna kick my shoes off and go move to an enchanted desert isle. Not quite Bali. But the light bulb went off and I was like, what's different from the islanders and and us people living in, urban civilizations? And it occurred to me that it wasn't the food, it was something else. It was this nature drug. And so to me, that was pretty much the sun and the light and and being connected to that energetic in all of the ways that it manifests in in like our world. And so all the food comes from the sun. Our life, everything that is alive because of the energetic of the sun, the photons, the photonic, that energy. And so that kind of started me down the path of like, okay, now we're dealing with light, energy, information, and this element that is actually communicating this energy and information to us. And then I started studying about kind of light and life. And yeah, and so that was kind of like where I got off the train, that was all focused on like food or exercise or these things as being, kind of the center of a person's health. And I actually started studying more kind of like the biophysics of like how the body works, and like what happens, the story of light and how it flows. And so yeah, that's kind of like the preamble to my present.
I love that. So, yeah, just go ahead and if you could explain to us, what does this sunlight have to do with our own physiological health? What is this bioelectricity in our body, and how does that correspond?
Well, okay, here we go. Well, all right, so I think that, like in the Bible, it says, like they kick off that whole, the Bible's like this, they kick off the whole story with God saying, let there be light, right? And then they don't tell us anything more about that. It's pretty much we get that one little nugget of information, and then we have to like kind of figure it all out for ourselves after that. So this is the story of me figuring it all out. So we've all heard about this guy named Einstein, right? So do you know what Einstein got his Nobel Prize for? So it wasn't for his famous equation, you know. So Einstein's famous for his energy equals mass times energy squared. E equals mc squared. And he didn't win the Nobel Prize for that, but made him kind of popular. He actually won the Nobel Prize for something called the photoelectric effect. And the photoelectric effect is essentially where, a photon will only interact with matter in the form of an electron. So a photon won't interact with a proton. It won't interact with neutrons. It doesn't interact with any of the other, like subatomic particles out there. Only electrons. And so so that is really at the center of like how we capture photonic energy from the sun. And so, okay, photoelectric effect. What does that mean? All right, so if you look at Einstein's equation, he basically says that energy, or it basically says that matter, I'm sorry, if you rearrange the equation, matter is actually photons that are slowed down. So our mass and the form of electrons and all the other subatomic particles is photonic energy that's just slowed down for just like however long, it takes. And so when they make the statement, we're beings of light, it's not cliche. It's not, like it's saying something nice about somebody because, they got a pretty smile or something. It's actually true. like biophysically. So, so we start there. So our body captures these, the photonic energy from the sun, in a variety of ways. So, of course, you walk out in the sun and everyone says, okay, if you go out, when UV is shining, then you can make vitamin D, and then there's all these conversations about vitamin D. Well, there's actually in every cell of your body, there is about 100,000 operations happening every second that are light mediated. So that means, like, for the photonic energy from the sun, now imagine you've got, like, I don't know, there's like 10 trillion cells in the body, something like that. I could be off on that number. Anyway, it's trillions of cells in the body times 100,000, like biophysical processes happening every second in every single one of those cells. And this is, in an organism, and this is what we call life. So the complexity of this light driven, kind of processes is literally like, I mean, it's astounding in its complexity, but in its simplicity, we are capturing electrons from the sun, and when we eat food, those are captured electrons as well. And and we have all of these processes in the body, which we call oxidation. So we always hear these cliches, right? It's like, oh, you need your antioxidants,
Yeah.
but there's never like, well, wait a minute. Why do you need antioxidants? Don't you need oxidants too if you're going to have a balanced diet?
Yeah.
um, but so the oxidation reactions happen, and this is the way that the body takes, this energy from the sun, whether it's food or whether it's energy from the sun, in the form of photons, and it cycles this energy through all of these processes until it shuttles these electrons down to each cell. And in the center of every cell, it's probably about 30% of the dry weight of a cell, and the human body actually. It's made up of these little organelles called mitochondria. And I mean, we were just talking about mitochondria just a little bit before, but this is where, we are undereducated, or maybe even miseducated, with regard to like human health and, and the biological function. Because maybe it's only within like the last 18, maybe 20 years where we actually, where the science has been done, where they now understand the mitochondrial biology. But the mitochondria as an organelle, we're taught in biology that it's the powerhouse of the cell. So you can think of it like the battery. And as we know, with batteries, you've got a positive side and a negative side. And the mitochondria basically have, as an organelle, have something very similar to that. But what they eat is not, they don't eat calories, they don't eat macronutrients, they don't even eat photons, but they do eat electrons. And so they have a process where all of these reactions, throughout the body, where, like, so you eat a bite of, peanut butter and jelly, and it goes into your stomach, and the acid breaks it. First you chew it and you make it smaller, and then it goes into the stomach and it gets even, and the acid breaks it down, and then it gets absorbed by the bacteria and the gut flora. And then anyways, and it gets broken down to the smaller, until it's actually able to hand off electrons to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria, there's like a string of, kind of like entry points for these electrons from the environment. And at the end, there's a little motor. And every time this motor spins, it kicks off ATP, which chemical energy, CO2, gas exchange, and water. Everyone always talks about the ATP, and they always talk about the CO2, you're doing your breath work, you need your energy, you're going to go, go, go. Everyone talks about the chemistry and the gas, but they don't talk about the water. And the water is actually probably the most important part, because now when you think of like respiration of the mitochondria, you think about it's also hydrating, not just energy and breathing, but it's hydrating. So those three things that support our life all happen at the mitochondrial level.
Mm.
And so you've got electrons going down a string. Now you can think of it like you've got electrons going down a wire, and like electricity in the mitochondria. And then you have this little motor that spins. What happens when you get a spinning electrical motor, like in your Tesla car or those motors? You get a magnetic field.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is like basic electronics. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not, an electrical engineer. Like I know how to get a screwdriver, and I know how to, connect this to that, and flip the switch and make sure I don't get, like electrocuted. It's about as much as I know. But the mitochondria essentially is this little organelle inside of our cells that generates the electricity and also generates a magnetic field.
So interesting.
And that's essentially like kind of like the story of like, oh, this is like now you take 30% of the weight, the dry weight of the body, and now you think like, okay, there's all these little motors and they're spinning at like, I don't know, 20,000 RPM, 100,000, in 10 trillion cells. And, and that pulsation and that, and that electricity, this is the origin of the biofield. And nobody ever talks about this in a way that, like, oh, hey, like I've never been to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, how's your biofield doing? I'd love to have that conversation.
I mean, you could just see it in people, some people are just like shining. They just literally shine, right? There's
Yeah.
just so much vibrancy in them.
Yeah. And so, so now we can go back to our cliches. You're glowing,
Yeah.
or, but the being of light, that beingness of light is, and this is like something that I've been trying to kind of develop, just kind of basic, really simple, like workarounds. Like, how do we measure this? It's like, I'm watching these videos on YouTube, and, you watch this professor at one university, and he's talking about like how, they can measure something called the voltage potential of a tissue. And this is where you kind of get more into the medical science, where like, well, how did they figure this out? Like, if we only, like clued into the mitochondria and their role in human biology about, let's call it, over the last 20 years, but really a lot in like the last 15, how did we figure out that, before that, like that the body was electric, and like, how was it measured? And like, what were they doing with it? And, and that's kind of the historical part, which is pretty fascinating, because, you get into like, okay, so I'll tell you like one story. There's this, if you want, do you want me to go to like proto, electrobiology?
I just wanted to drop in one quick thing. It's that I have read stories about, and not the studies to it, but that Qigong practitioners, for example, that their biofields have been measured. And I don't know if that's true, or how you can actually do that, or measure the radiation of a person, right? But yes, that voltage is just like so crazy high with people who are working with themselves, with their energy. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I'd really love to connect this a bit here.
So there was a video, it's a short clip, you can find it on YouTube, of a healer here in Indonesia. It comes from the series done by a couple British documentarians in the 80s, and it was called The Ring of Fire. And it's a series of documentaries on Indonesia. And so, but in I think I forget which one, but you can Google it and find it. They found one of these local healers, and I'm sure you've heard about these people who literally are healing with like electricity through their fingers here in
Mhm.
Bali. So they they got one of these guys to go on camera, and he was a very humble guy, and he was like, people were and they were showing him like working on people with like electrical fingers, and then they'd bring the crew up, and then he would like zap, like literally with his hands, he would like zap the crew with like electricity from his fingers. And then so anyways, it showed this healer, this Indonesian healer, I think it was from the island of Java, actually lighting, paper on fire.
Mm.
So, this is like a very well developed, ability to person's ability to project. So I saw that, and it's like a 10-minute clip and like a 2-hour documentary. And I was like, whoa, like superpowers. I knew they were there. I've always wanted that.
Have you been one of these healers?
No, no, but
I have.
I've actually heard, like somebody gave me the contact, and I'm waiting to like injure myself so I can go get healed.
No, no, just go. It's the craziest. I think it's really the craziest experience that I've ever had in my life because it
Mm,
literally feels like you're being electrocuted, and
yeah,
nothing there but her hands in that case. And wow, I felt amazing afterwards. I just felt like so. She just goes with this. I think it's just coconut oil she puts on your body and just strokes over your whole body, and you just feel
yeah.
so light and well balanced and just complete zen. It's beautiful.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna get that lady's contact info after. I want to learn how to do that myself. It's come back from the hard day and just like give yourself a like a what's up.
Oh yeah, we have our ways to work with energy through lots of ancient yogic other cultures practices, right?
Yeah. So back in the 60s, there was in the slide deck that I sent you, there's a doctor named Robert O. Becker. And he was an orthopedic surgeon with the US Army. And so he's obviously working with a lot of 60s. So he's working with combat injuries and broken bones. And and he had this question. He's like, hey, wait a minute, you know, if amphibians, can heal, you can chop off their whole limb and they can regenerate a limb. Like why can't humans do it? Like what gives? What's the difference? So because he was dealing with fractures that were not healing. So, bones would be broken, and it's called a non-union when the bones don't grow back together. And so he was trying to figure out, like, by studying, amphibians that could regenerate, how, what was going on with them that wasn't going on with human beings. And so he recognized he was measuring the tissues, and whenever there's an injury, like you get a cut on your finger, there's actually a current change. The voltage changes in those tissues. And that change in voltage basically is a signal to the body to basically send, like to heal that. And so what goes there? Blood cells. And blood cells, I don't know if you know, but blood cells don't have nuclei.
Mhm.
They are essentially like these floating messenger cells that can be anything. So they can go to any injury in the body, and depending on that signal, that voltage change in the tissues of that it's called the current of injury. Um, they will regenerate and close the wound and heal the body. And this is what we do. And he was studying how that, was working in amphibians. And he's doing everything from like taking planaria, which is, it's kind of crazy flatworm, and, cutting their brain in half, and they'd grow two heads and they would grow their brain again. And all these experiments in the 60s. And then he recognized that if he could simulate that current of injury in the tissues, he could actually heal the non-union fractures, and he could also increase the speed at which, wounds healed. So here we have, no, so this is like 1960s technology, very basic, not like what we have today. And he was healing, wound repair, he was speeding that. And then he also figured out that this voltage, it's called a voltage potential in the tissues, in the cells, is really what directs, how those cells decide whether they're going to be heart or lung or spleen or, or whatever kind of tissue that they're going to be. So that was one of his discoveries. And this same guy figured out that bone. So, in our body, we've got bone, muscle, and then wrapping all of that, there's another tissue called fascia.
Yes.
And every single one of these tissues, muscle, bone, fascia, and all of the connective tissues are what's called piezoelectric. And so that means that when you flex the bone, when you flex the tissues, they generate an electrical current. So not only is the mitochondria collecting electrons from the environment, but just moving, and fluxing and, pounding, like this kind of tapping and whatnot. This also generates electricity. And, and let's be precise here. It's generating a direct current, a DC electrical current. And, when we plug into the wall is what's called alternating current. And so it's actually going on and off, in a frequency of here, 50 cycles per second or 50 hertz. Body, there's no alternating. It is a constant electrical current. And so these are his two primary, his two greatest discoveries. He discovered that all these tissues generate electricity. And then he discovered that, whenever the body is damaged, that at the, really at the organizational level of cells and tissues and organ systems and whatnot, there's a level of kind of information along with the energy that is, that's present, and communication.
Absolutely.
So that, and I'm sorry, one more thing. And that same guy was testing acupuncture, like puncture points. And he discovered, he's like, oh, the voltage potential is greater at the acupuncture point than it is in the surrounding tissues. And it was right about that time that the US government that was funding him said, no, stop that, make that go away. No.
I love that much, because this is where so much fascination there for me, having kind of been socialized in India with words like prana, nadi system for most of my life, really. And me studying acupuncture myself now, because I'm so fascinated in how we can direct energy so precisely within our system. And prana, just relating to all that you've just explained about how the mitochondria are involved in producing electricity in our body or reproducing. And then the fascia in the Indian system, we're talking about 72,000 nadis, energy channels, which are mostly, of course, related to the nervous system, but so many are not. And the fascia are so like now we can go into the topic of plasma, and we could go so much further, but I don't want to not want to go there now. But just yeah, just wanting to say that that I love that, and it's super interesting that she's saying it's from the 60s to study, because I know
Yeah.
that at least until maybe in the 90s, but at least until the late 80s, when people when there was surgery done on bone or whatever, they would just like cut the flesh open, and would just cut the fascia out and use it like some waste material, just cut it out and throw it out like it has no function.
Yeah.
How humans always think we are on the peak of science and we already know everything, right? And then
Yeah.
there's just like literally so much more to discover, which if we just like listen a bit more to a lot of ancient cultures or teachings, um yeah, we could have avoided some great mistakes if if we would have
That
just
doesn't make money.
yeah.
You can't patent the nutties,
That's
you
true.
know?
Herbs and acupuncture, they don't make much
I mean, like acupuncture, what are you gonna do? You know, like you're gonna sell a new flavor of needle or something? I mean, like,
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
mean,
you can't
yeah,
patent herbs or plants as well. That's a big problem in India.
yeah. Well, you know, and honestly, like when you look at, so Robert Becker was studying the stuff in the 60s as a military physician, and as long as he was like, behaving, he kind of got on the wrong side of his employers, because his conclusions were basically what you say. It's like, um, his conclusions were like, hey, there's no waste here. And hey, when you're doing that actually affects the body negatively, because that's operating within, the biological, realm. And, so that's like a long history. So anyways, I went like deep nerd grade on all these topics, because I was like, okay, so, and then what happened? Like, because, and we don't have to talk about this now, but like maybe a little bit later, but it's like, as electrical beings living in an electrical world, surrounding ourselves with electricity and appliances and broadcast technologies, and you know they all like have an effect on us biologically. And and so it's like figuring out, kind of mapping out what that looks like. But
Yeah.
I want to rewind just a little bit before we kind of like move forward, because there's a concept that I think is so important when you're talking about like photoelectric, like natural energy sources, and how we, kind of as native life on this planet, as part of ecosystems, how, you know, we live like those islanders, running around barefoot, eating everything in their environment. They don't have, bulletproof coffee and, and modern medical, like acute response wizardry. But they do have the sun, and they do have living in harmony with the environment. And so I want to introduce the topic of quantized. So this is a word. It's like you take the word quantum, which we all think like, oh no, don't go there. Like, oh shit, he just said quantum. Like, oh no, make it stop. You know. So but I want to introduce the term quantized, because quantized, quantum just means it's a measure of something. A quanta is just measuring something. And in the case of photons and electrons, which are elementary particles, each one of those is a quanta. So each photon that slows down into our matter is a quanta of photonic energy. And so this is what we call quantized. So each one of those photons interacts with an electron in us and slows down, and that electron is part of the relationship, our energetic relationship, to our environment and to ourselves. And so when something is quantized, it basically means that it is, that it's equal to. So all the energy we get from the sun is essentially the programming, the data set of the sun. So all the natural food, our environment, like touching the ground, all of these energetic, grounding, and that what that energetic influences, they are all quantized to the energy and the data set of the sun. And so that's our data set as a human being. This is what, like we start as a single cellular organism and we grow into 10 trillion cells. In a quantized, meaning in balance and in relationship to that data set of energy, information, and communication from the sun. And so that's health right there. Like that's how we stay healthy and how we power ourselves is basically adhering as closely to the data set, the natural data set that's provided by the sun. So that term quantized. So now let's shift the view. Like, what is a quantized food? So, you always hear people say, you want to eat what's in season in your environment. And so now I'm gonna like basically draw the comparison to that and the word quantized. So when you're in an environment, the food that's growing around you is receiving the same data set from the sun that you are. So it's quantized, and to you. So it's like, you guys, you resonate with the same data set of the sun. So we're living on the equator now. The sun's really strong. Everything grows, especially the mold, and so eating the food in our environment, like our body, there's no mismatch there because the data set is the same. And this is why eating food that, say, was shipped from 5,000 miles away is a biological mismatch to the body, because the sunlight that was shining on that food, whether it was animal or plant or whatever it was, is a different data set than what you are. And so, it's not something that, you're ever going to be consciously aware of because, food tastes like food. But your mitochondria consuming the electrons of the environment, that creates a mismatch. And those mismatches, means the mitochondria will make less energy. And when it makes less energy, you get something called biological chaos. Another word for that is called inflammation.
Yeah.
And so, and that word, I mean, I don't know how big the medical dictionary is. It's probably like, multiple volumes on, all the diseases that afflict mankind right now. But there's really only one disease, and that's inflammation.
Yes.
Everything starts with, an unhealthy, energetic, like it's not making enough energy. And then some organ system or some system, some loop, something, like gets inflamed. And if it happens long enough, then you get a disease. And then, you become connected to the medical system, and that's no fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, so interesting. I would love to go into this topic of EMF, of electromagnetic frequency that influences us from our environments, especially living in urban environments, and those cell phones, I guess, that we're carrying with us all day. How does that influence us?
Phew. Huh. Well, I mean, when you look at just, the average person spends about 90% of their time indoors. And so when you start, I can say, hey, we're beings of light and, we get powered by the sun, and all the products of the sun. But when you spend 90% of your time indoors, you're now powered by a different light source. And that light source is, I think I sent you a slide and there's like a picture and it shows what essentially what the data set or the bandwidth of like the sun is. And then it shows, like, well, what is an incandescent bulb, which is pretty much what, from 1873 to, I think about the last 2012, I think was when they started banning incandescent bulbs in the United States. And I think it's now a global thing where the incandescent bulb is now banned. That light source is almost all in the red and the infrared frequencies, and which are healthy. And but then when you look at the frequency spectra of the bulbs that we now live under, it's LEDs and compact fluorescence, and they have these big spikes. They don't have the same frequency spectra as the sun. So this is the light that we're using to power our biology. And and as you can see, when you look at the range of pathologies that are kind of afflicting on an accelerated basis, I mean, when you look at like, my cohort, so I'm 53. Well, no, wait, I'm 52. In a couple of weeks, I'm having my 53rd birthday. But when you look at like my cohort, they're, I mean, chronic disease and, and people that are on like multiple meds that have, like mobility problems and whatnot start to really, increase. Diabetes, obesity. I mean, like the list is, accelerating actually. But our lifestyles over the, like the last few decades, it seems like we have gotten, more and more of these inputs surrounding us. So, Robert O. Becker spoke about, his book, The Bioelectric, which was based on his work from like the late 50s and mostly the 60s, wasn't published until the early 80s. And, and he was commenting then, this is before cell phones, before, everything. I think it's published in 1983. So this is before even the earliest cell phones. And he was talking about like two-way radios, that would be next to a person's head and how that affected like brain state, how it affected, us biologically. And now we spend a majority of our day, looking at screens, with a device that is broadcasting. I mean, if you think about, so the average person lives indoors, they're surrounded with, they're looking at a screen. So the light that comes from the screen, is it's like, going directly to their brain, like, I think the average is 16 hours a day. Is what the average screen time for the average person is. Because if they're not on a computer or something for work,
Wow.
the doom scroll, and this is a huge topic, but, we just have to say that as electrical beings, all of these things affect us. The frequencies of light affect us. The broadcast energies affect us, and then, and that's what's closest to us. And then we look and, we see we're living in homes that have wiring going through them, and those create electrical fields as well. And all of these, I mean, like I can drill down into the details, but I don't think we really have time to do that. So we're just keeping it broad.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to recognize that these are all stressors on the body. And when we're stressed, we go into the parasympathetic, which is the fight. I'm sorry, we go into the sympathetic because we're stressed. I always get those confused. Um, but this energetic stressor on our body puts us into, a mild fight or flight mode all the time. And that's just the frequency response of our autonomic system to just the frequency elements. That's not talking about like, how was your doom scroll today? And how excited you can get from the content elements,
Yeah.
you know? And so there's actually like a, you know, a, uh, how should we say, like a stacking effect where our natural state is to be in the parasympathetic, you
Yes.
know, and we're all, but our technology and our devices are creating an invisible stress. We can't sense it directly. We don't know that, oh my God, like I'm like the Wi-Fi is on the wall right there. So imagine yourself in front of a screen for, the average I think is 16 hours a day. And so my computer is wired right now. But if I were to actually, take the wire off and measure it with a radio frequency meter, so I'll turn this on and it's basically measuring, the amount of Wi-Fi energy that I have in the room now, which my computer's not connected to it. But if it were, so when it's beeping like that, that basically means that it is an unhealthy, level of exposure to the radio frequency in the air. Let me turn that off. But this is just to give you an idea that you're sitting in front of your computer and you're working, you're doing your thing, but you're actually in a very powerful field of broadcast energy.
Yeah.
And this is hitting your face, it's hitting your brain, it's hitting your heart, it's hitting your thyroids. It's all of your vital organs right here. And now imagine if you have AirPods on,
Mm.
and your AirPods are actually, a lot of these things can be, controlled by creating distance between you and the broadcast. But when you have an AirPod, it's right next to your most sensitive electromagnetic organ in your body, your brain, and it's directing a signal directly through your brain.
Absolutely.
And if I were to take this out and measure it, and it makes my meter go all the way to the maximum. And imagine that is like right next to your brain.
Yeah. All old school wired headphones.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so these are like the first layer.
Yeah.
We live in a world that's just constant. It's a dynamic environment, and so it's very important. That you recognize you're like, you have to have the tools to kind of de-escalate yourself from the parasympathetic, into the parasympathetic, from the fight or flight, that are become just like habitual to you, because there's so many things. Yeah.
Yeah. I just try to sum it up. If you could give us 3 things that we can do to preserve our bioelectric health, what would those be?
3 things. Well, first, wake up with the sun. Get the sun on your eyes, the sun on your skin, so your skin is in the game. Think of your body as, like an organic photoreceptor. So the sun, powering the sun, starting your day with those early morning, with the early morning rays, that's the most powerful thing you can do, to set your bioelectric field. Grounded to the earth with your eyes looking at the sun. That sets the clock, that sets everything, and it starts all of the hormonal generation. It starts all of the energy like in the right place. That's the first thing. Second thing, recognize that everything that we have now that's broadcasting hurts you. And so to every degree possible, when you control your environment, wire your computer wire the things that are on your body. If you read the end user license agreement for these things, it actually says to not keep it on the body. Really small print buried at page 468 or something. But so always keep your phone away from your body. And so and any broadcast thing, always keep it as far away from you as you can and keep it wired. So that's the second. So 1 and 2. And then the third thing, you have to bring in awareness to your environment, because even though the things that you can control, you're taking special care and whatnot, but then you're sitting on an airplane for 16 hours with, the person next to you, like with 5 devices going, and you can live in a place that's really, high population density. So, I would say, invest in a simple meter so you can bring awareness to your environment, because, the things you can control, but all the things that you can't control, you need to bring in awareness to so you can make better decisions. And, and that's just like general rules of thumb, like each one of these things, I've worked out what works for me as far as like, hey, as an athlete, how do I, optimize my, my performance and my recovery, and, be able to do more. And so there's like, like lifestyle elements and whatnot, but, ultimately the closer that you can get to nature and the data set of the sun, the healthier, the happier, the more inspired you'll be. Period. Full stop. Like being a native in the South Pacific Island, climbing coconut trees, don't fall out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Life force energy, what do you call it? All right. Yeah, great. So happy to have done this chat with you and recorded it for other people, because there is so much value in this, and bringing just some clarity in this oftentimes spiritual top or marked as being spiritual, when spiritual means as things we can't explain, but we actually can. And yeah, I just love to bring light and clarity to this and help people make the connections. Yeah. So thank you
Yeah.
so much, Greg.
Thank you, Anna.
Super interesting.
Yeah. This topic is, there's nothing more interesting to me, because it's all, it's like, you want to live a happy and healthy and like inspired life. And it's like, and so my, like what I really focus on in doing this is focusing on those, the positives, but recognizing that there's these interference elements, these interference patterns that can kind of, interfere with, the practice of optimal. And, and so bringing the awareness and the vocabulary and, and the tools to bear so you can minimize those interference patterns, and that's kind of like just broad speaking, because our world from now into the next 5 years is moving into, like technologies that we have not even educated on at all, but it entails the merging of our biology with the machines. So no longer you be able to move it away from you, and create that gap, that distance between the stress, element and your biology, and so becoming more aware of like those technologies that are, that they want to like put inside of our skin, you know, and then how that works, and then being able to make decisions so we remain, like optimal beings.
Yeah, thank you. So interesting. anyone has further questions, I hope I can link some contact of yours to reach out to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Well, I'll do that. Thank you so much, Greg. Have a wonderful day.